In fact, in 2008, I was approached by a couple representatives from a little small obscure office somewhere in the Pentagon. That office was called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. People ask me, well, why you, Lou? And as it was explained to me, it was because of my background. I'm a career counterintelligence special agent. Many of my assignments were overseas, initially in the Latin American hemisphere, and then later on, after September 11th, over in Afghanistan and the Middle East. I took an oath many, many years ago to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that's why I accepted the offer to join ATIP. What we're seeing on gun camera footage is being validated and verified by eyewitness testimony, which is also being further substantiated by radar data. My intent was to have this information presented to the Secretary of Defense so he can make an informed decision. There are aspects of this phenomenon that definitely belong within the national security arena, especially if these objects were over controlled U.S. airspace. That's inherent government business. The boss needed to see the data. And unfortunately, that information was not permitted to get to him. On a regular and routine basis, I was brought up to the Secretary's suite, and I was briefing his direct reports. But they wouldn't bring it to his attention. And I suspect they were trying to save him from embarrassment, because if someone in the media said, were you ever briefed on UFOs, he'd have to say yes. And so, after several failed attempts to brief the Secretary of Defense, I chose to resign. Sometimes if you want to help the system, you have to leave the very system to do it. And that's what I chose to do. My resignation, it wasn't easy. It was probably most difficult on my family. I had given up a successful career, but it's kind of a code of ethic with us in government that if you can't fix a problem internally, then you leave, which is ultimately what I had to do. And that's why I resigned from the Department of Defense.
Luis Elizondo's letter of resignation that he wrote for the Secretary of Defense, I think that might have just knocked me out almost more than anything else. He explained why he was resigning this job, and it had to do with his understanding that UFOs were a national security concern. To see that written down and the courage that it took for him to do that, it was just incredible.
In order to understand why I resigned, I think you have to go back to where I came from. I come from, on my father's side, Cuban immigrants. That's meaningful for me because this country offered my family opportunities that nobody else would. And so from a very young age, I've always wanted to serve the country that gave my family so much. You know, ironically, I left the Department of Defense out of loyalty, not disloyalty. I left the Department of Defense to finish the very mission they gave me in the first place.
There is no such thing as a domestic enemy in the United States. The Second Amendment of the U.S. Constitution grants the right to bear arms against a tyrant government. Taking an oath to protect the government from a domestic enemy is unconstitutional. Former counterintelligence agent Luis Elizondo says, it's kind of a code of ethics with us in government, that if you cannot fix a problem internally then you leave. Luis Elizondo's story is an example of that code of ethics. We need to bring more awareness toward the option of not obeying a superior when the order is intended to be a show of force and not the primary objective, like what occurred at Ruby Ridge, Idaho and Waco, Texas. Leaving a scene to plan a safe arrest is a well understood, accepted and applied method of arresting a violent suspect. This course of action is similar to the safety reasons for discontinuing a high-speed car chase.